we're a little bit blind to this in the United States because we don't have the same kind of legal infrastructure or even digital identity infrastructure yet. But boy, a lot of other countries do. In fact, the majority of countries do.
This is Privacy on the Ground, where privacy meets real life. Hey there. Welcome to part 2 of our Privacy on the Ground mini-series on C2PA. This series complements World Privacy Forum's report, Privacy, Identity, and Trust in C2PA. I'm Kaye, World Privacy Forum's Deputy Director and co-author of that report. Our goal for our C2PA research, and really a primary reason for researching C2PA in the first place, is to understand how it uses data. C2PA has a connection to identity data, and that's what I'll dig into in this episode. But first, let's do a very, very quick recap of the key takeaways of World Privacy Forum's analysis of C2PA. What it does and what it does not do. 1. C2PA is not just a content labeling system. It is designed to produce detailed data about countless pieces of digital content and about the people who created it. And 2, the data produced through C2PA doesn't just stay in one place. By the very nature of how C2PA works, that data is meant to be shared, replicated, ingested, and analyzed by any system that knows to look for it and knows how to use it. So again, C2PA, it's not just a framework for creating content labels inside images that we humans can read. C2PA creates detailed encoded data that technical machines and systems can read, suck in, and store. And because interoperability of C2PA is part of its design and necessary for it to work effectively, systems that support C2PA can ingest C2PA data, attach it to other information, and share it with other systems. As for what C2PA is not designed to do, that's also important. Even though C2PA is often discussed as a way to counteract problems wrought by AI, C2PA is not built to hunt for clues that content was generated by AI. It doesn't search for signs that a video is a deepfake. It isn't designed to detect whether or not an AI-based image was generated using specific content. And it doesn't fact-check information in content. I'll put it another way. Some generative AI software uses C2PA to mark images created by those systems. You can think of this as intentionally asserted metadata. C2PA is designed to attach intentionally asserted information to content. But it is not designed to expose otherwise hidden use of AI, like in deepfakes. There's more detail on this in part 1 of this podcast series, and far more detail in World Privacy Forum's actual report. Okay, so we know C2PA is a framework for tracing the origin and modifications made to a piece of media. What's identity got to do with it? Well, let's think about why some people and organizations want to use C2PA. Many content creators, artists and musicians, media and entertainment brands, and other businesses, and even government agencies producing and sharing documents or other media are concerned with protecting their creations and protecting their intellectual property. They also might want to use C2PA to indicate when they don't want their content used to train AI, or to indicate when they've consented to certain uses of their content. In the face of AI deepfakes, creators may want to distinguish their content from AI-generated content. For instance, an artist might want to mark when her illustrations are genuinely her work, or an actor or voiceover artist when an audio file is actually his recorded voice. So identity is important to these sorts of users. They may want to incorporate their identities into C2PA provenance metadata. And right now, early products and applications, things that generate C2PA metadata or support C2PA, like digital image software and a video management system, they allow creators or content owners, such as media publishers, to attach identity information like names, social media IDs, or other identifiers to content files as part of the C2PA data workflow. But attaching identity information to images, video, and other media files can have serious privacy implications and put C2PA in the highly regulated realm of identity around the world. And as you'll hear more about in a talk later on in this episode with World Privacy Forum's Executive Director, Pam Dixon, there are important government regulations and, in some places, data protection and identity authorities guiding use of identity data and ecosystems around the world. Think about your own content, the photos and videos you share online and upload to social media platforms. Should they have your identifiable information attached to them? Think about how C2PA works and how, in some cases, any system that has adopted C2PA could potentially access that information. Are there some situations you'd be okay with including that identity information? And are there some you wouldn't? Think about people in vulnerable or potentially dangerous situations, such as independent journalists covering conflict zones, people living in countries with authoritarian governments, domestic violence victims, or even people sharing video from an election polling place or political event. Having their identity attached to photos they take or videos they share could put them at risk. C2PA actually has its own harms modeling documentation, and an earlier version of that document actually addressed potential harms of identity exposure and government control and surveillance through C2PA. That document stated, quote, "In some countries, governments may issue digital certificates to all of its citizens. These certificates could be potentially used to sign C2PA manifests. If government control and surveillance is not regulated, or if there are laws meant to attach journalistic identity to media posted online, these certificates may be used to enforce suppression of speech or to persecute journalists, if required, by claim generators that do not guarantee privacy and confidentiality," unquote. The risks of C2PA-enabled government control, surveillance, and speech suppression remain. Still, that section of the C2PA harms modeling documentation was removed and is no longer included in the latest version. Okay, but what about redaction? You'll recall from our first C2PA episode, I noted that C2PA does allow users to redact some types of sensitive metadata. And C2PA's technical specifications state that those building C2PA-based systems should allow creators and publishers to opt in to its use, rather than to force people to use it or include it in a product by default. But it's important to recognize that technical standards and specifications can only go so far. Because C2PA is an open technical framework, those building products or applications with C2PA or supporting it, they make the decisions when it comes to how they actually apply the framework in product design. So that earlier version of C2PA's harms modeling documentation, it also noted that although guidance to allow for anonymity and pseudonymity has been issued, tools that are actually compliant with the technical specifications still could sell C2PA information to third parties or choose to, quote, not follow user experience guidance meant to empower users to retain control of their information. It turns out that section of the harms modeling documentation, it was also stripped in the current version, even though the potential for third-party C2PA data gathering, storage, and sales holds true. In my ongoing research on C2PA, I have spoken to third parties that use C2PA data downstream to build and sell new products and services. There's more in the full report discussing these concerns, including references to excellent resources, such as from an elections observer who tested C2PA in election-related photos, and from Witness, an organization that helps people use video and tech to protect and defend human rights. I encourage you to check out their evaluations of C2PA. So this identity stuff, it's super important, and it's actually been a touchy subject among those designing C2PA. Let's step into the Wayback Machine, shall we? As the technical specifications of C2PA evolved into what they are today, the approach to identity did too. In fact, the designers of C2PA made an abrupt change in January 2024 related to identity. They removed certain types of metadata assertions related to identity and, quote, identified humans from the C2PA technical specifications. In the C2PA specs themselves, C2PA drafters called this a, quote, philosophical change and, quote, a significant departure from previous versions. But the thing is, identity data remains possible in the C2PA workflow. It turned out, just a month after identity was removed from the core C2PA specifications, a new home for identity-related work popped up. A new group called COG, short for Creator Assertions Working Group, CAWG. A primary drafter of C2PA actually explained that shift to me. He said the idea was to distinguish between metadata reflecting how a media file was made and who or what entity created or produced it. From then on, C2PA metadata assertions would reflect the how, and COG metadata assertions the who or what. He told me the idea was to ensure that core technical provenance was distinct from identity-related matters. Well, let's talk a little bit about this identity stuff in COG. There are a few things I'll point out. The identity-related aspects of the C2PA workflow are in a relatively early stage. A variety of identity systems could be used to insert identity data into the C2PA workflow. Those could include private, third-party systems, and they could include government identity systems, such as systems that use biometric data, like face or iris data. And that means data from those sorts of identity systems could be attached to content. The COG identity specs specifically mention government-issued identity documents such as driver's licenses, credentials from professional organizations, social media identifiers, or digital wallet IDs. So, obviously, there's a lot more to the COG identity process, and I encourage you to check out our report, which includes some of that detail, along with helpful diagrams showing data flow and system interoperability. It's also important to understand how C2PA and COG fit into a much broader identity ecosystem. You know, people I talk to here in the US are often stunned to learn that countries around the world have well-established and highly regulated digital identity systems. They do. And World Privacy Forum's executive director, Pam Dixon, is an expert in these systems in terms of privacy and how they are regulated. Here's Pam.
The framing in the report around identity and the analysis that when you read the report, the analysis is tied directly to the specifications around identity that are related to C2PA. However, the background information that led us to the decision to focus on identity is broader and more complex than the actual specifications. So in other words, there's a really big world of identity and identity ecosystems out there, and it's very, very developed. So it's developed across all of the various realms. So for example, there's digital and technical infrastructure for national and other commercial, for example, ID ecosystems. And this is a very, very deep, complex structure. It's in most regions of the world. And then on top of that, there is an incredible amount of legal infrastructure around identity. Now, in the United States, this is very, very different because we have a light legal infrastructure around identity for the most part, in terms of classical national ID. In comparison with what I would call the GDPR countries, or the 165 plus countries in the world that have passed GDPR style regulations. GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation, which started in Europe as a very strong privacy set of regulations in Europe, and then it spread literally across the globe. So it's in much of Africa, Latin America, Asia, etc. World Privacy Forum has a global table of privacy laws, and you can literally look at the global table and see that the map is just filled with this kind of regulation, and this kind of regulation involves identity. So for example, this spring I was in Ethiopia and held a workshop with the African Data Protection Authorities. And the room was filled, and it was an extraordinary conversation. And also invited for part of the workshop were the identity authorities of Africa. So there's data protection authorities, which is a full-time job with full staff that they implement the data protection regulations. And identity authorities are very significant, often ministerial level positions where they implement the identity regulations that are usually national. So for folks who are not used to identity authorities and identity regulations, they're very robust. And the C2PA system will definitely be running into these two factors in a very big way. We're a little bit blind to this in the United States because we don't have the same kind of legal infrastructure or even digital identity infrastructure yet. But boy, a lot of other countries do. In fact, the majority of countries do. Whenever, just to kind of make a short analysis of it, there's something called a DPIA, or a Data Protection Impact Assessment. In countries with GDPR, which is 165 plus and counting, there's a required data protection impact assessment whenever AI or algorithmic processes are being used. What this means in practice is that any ecosystems or technologies that involve identity, that involve algorithms, et cetera, will be sucked into this data protection impact assessment. And in each country that is not part of Europe, it is the Data Protection Authority that does these impact assessments and requires them from the ministers and the identity authorities and et cetera. And what I can say is that I think something that is not been taken into consideration, or perhaps has not been taken into consideration, is this very deep legal infrastructure that is elsewhere in the world. And I am very unsure how that will go, given the structure of C2PA and in its current iteration. In the report, when we talk about identity, we talk about it under COG, CAWG. That's really the entity that is working with identity in the C2PA framework. So it kind of plugs in. But whenever you plug in identity, and you're going to run into a lot of legal structures in most of the world. And these legal structures require a lot of analysis and a lot of oversight from the data protection authorities and the identity authorities, which have robust legislation, and it's usually separate legislation for both of these authorities. So identity authorities really know their ID ecosystems. They are very, very familiar with tokenized ID, which is an idea that's throughout COG. These are not new systems for them. I mean, when you think of India's Aadhaar identity ecosystem, it's an extraordinary structure. It serves more than 1 billion people, and it is a near real time or real time, depending on where you are, in digital infrastructure that provides biometrically assured identity. So this is already a complex ecosystem that has a lot of tokenization, a lot of decentralization, and how COG and identity within the C2PA framework fits into all of these different identity ecosystems, both technically and legally, is a question that has not really been responded to fully yet, not yet. And that would need to happen. And so that's one of the reasons that we spent a lot of time in the report really digging into the specification, saying, okay, what does the C2PA framework say about identity, or how does it attach to identity ecosystems, or how does it handle identity? So we really limited ourselves in the report to those questions, but the reason we looked at it is because of all of these broader ecosystems that I'm talking about. And, that really will be the next step that falls to the C2PA folks, the people who are involved with setting that standard, eventually perhaps at ISO. But this is going to be some of the work that they're going to need to grapple with, and that eventually policymakers will need to also grapple with. It's a very, very complex ecosystem. It reminds me a lot of the advertising ecosystem in its complexity. It's different, and it's not advertising. It's just the complexity level of the ecosystem is just extraordinary, though.
Okay, No doubt that as C2PA is built into more and more products and systems, the ways it relates to privacy and identity are immensely important. But there's another super important aspect of C2PA we focused on in our research, and that's how C2PA affects trust. In our next episode, I'll dig into the C2PA trust model and how C2PA metadata is used as signals for measuring the trustworthiness of content. I'll discuss the technical caveats that can impede the effectiveness of C2PA and affect its use as a signal for measuring the trustworthiness of content. And I'll talk about C2PA trust lists and how opting out of using C2PA can lead to negative trust measures. Meantime, if you're interested in getting more detail about identity in relation to C2PA, about C2PA metadata, about how systems built with and supporting C2PA interoperate and exchange data, and about how C2PA metadata is used as a signal of trustworthiness, check out World Privacy Forum's report, Privacy, Identity, and Trust in C2PA. It's at worldprivacyforum.org. I'm Kaye. Thanks so much for listening.